Surviving the Survivor.
Carm, I told you to come with vigor and energy today, and it appears that you have done that. You have replaced the green shawl with a beautiful blue, purple, blue, and blue paisley shawl. You're looking lovely, Carm.
Thank you, darling. You are not colorblind.
I want to start. This is coming from a guy who was writing a book about you to memorialize you till about 12:30 in the morning, and then worked on the podcast. And
Joel, it's beyond any Oedipal complex. The title of the book should be Beyond the Oedipal Complex.
I'll take it under consideration. I'm trying to brand. It's going to be Surviving the Survivor with a new subtitle. It is when you're building a brand, Carm. So let me start with the first comment I see on a newly released episode today with Judy Sang of Asian American Legal Focus and Fancy Fiction, who has their own YouTube channel. The first comment I see, fantastic, we're going to, Carm, we're getting there. I'm the host, stand on by. The comment reads, fantastic show. When the four of you get together for a discussion, it's the best because you know the case and cast of characters so well. Thank you for organizing the show, Carm. We love you.
It's a true story.
First thing I read, Carm, you organize in spirituality. Anyway, once again, we are discussing Katie Magbanua's Proffer, and we have two of the very best here to talk about that. Of course, on the bottom of your screen, you've got John Singer, co-founder of Singer Deutsch LLP, a graduate of the Georgetown Law Center. He was designated New York super lawyer more times than you have fingers on your two hands and toes on your 2 feet, so I won't go through all the dates. He makes regular appearances as a legal analyst for CNBC, a gazillion other outlets, and he is a diehard Patriots fan. So diehard that I saw a picture on Facebook that he is, you know how you know someone has got stature? He's not sitting in the stands. He's standing in the tunnel where the players come out. That's how you know John Singer is a player. You've got Melissa Hamilton above him, who does outdo John in the sense that she's got a law degree and a PhD. She's a senior lecturer of law and criminal justice at the University Surrey School of Law, holding both a JD and a PhD. Very impressive. So,
Joel, you should mention what is behind the doctor's back.
Is that the Seine? Is that
the
Thames? Thames. I can't see that well. The Thames, the River Thames, for those who are watching.
And if you are not good, you go right on the Thames to the tower.
Carm is always teaching, and this is a case in point. And Carm was a great segue because we are now on Patreon. If you want to support the podcast, please check us out on Patreon. You're going to get ad-free programming, behind-the-scenes content, all the insanity that goes on between me and Carm. And you're going to get, believe this or not, you're going to get monthly Zoom meetings with Carm, who is a Holocaust survivor, a licensed therapist, and one of the wisest women I've ever known.
That's what the write-up say. Now I have a new title because some of the people who wrote critiques said that I was wise.
And I came up with a hashtag, AKA, Ask Carmela Anything, hashtag AKA, which is also known as, but AKA. Okay, so on to the very latest. No one wants to hear about us anymore. John and Melissa, Fancy Fiction, who was on our show that was released this morning, is reporting now that the Magbanua proffer could be sealed. What does this mean, John, and what does it mean for Charlie's case and the rest of this all moving forward?
So what it means is that the proffer itself and whatever Ms. Magbanua were to tell the prosecutors would not be released or disseminated into the public domain. This case has been interesting in the sense that so much of what's happened behind closed doors has been infused into the public domain. We've learned, and Florida has obviously very broad sunshine laws, and things are very easily discoverable in Florida, more so certainly than New York. But this case very much has been not just tried in the media, but so much private information has been put into the public domain that it would be a bit unusual for Katie's proffer to be sealed and not be released publicly. But it's possible that's the case, especially if there's going to be more prosecutions down the line and she's going to have to testify, you're not going to want to give the potential defendants a free look at what she's going to say. Now, they'll have a chance possibly to depose her if they are indicted, and we're talking about the three Adelsons who haven't been, but you don't want to give them a free look now. You don't want to lay all your cards on the table. That's not what the prosecutor has an interest in doing. So it will be interesting to see if they go with the strategy that they've gone with thus far, which is to err on the side of making things public. But there's definitely a compelling reason not to do so if you plan on charging more of the Adelsons.
Arm, all that organization, you can't believe you forget to turn your cell phone off after you organized everything.
I'm only human.
Simply amazing. Dr. Hamilton, do you agree with John's assessment? I mean, could it benefit the prosecution to keep this proffer sealed potentially? And I mean, is there any part of the law that says how long you don't have to keep this sealed? Could it be sealed for eternity as far as we know?
Yes, as long as, well, if they do pursue other people, of course, then that could be discoverable. But I have a kind of a different theory potentially, or at least it's based on some of your previous guest theory that the reason that Katie has been basically silent on what she may be wanting to tell now is that she was afraid, maybe afraid of Charlie is what the suggestion was. But it could be because of the people involved in terms of the two, Siegfried and Lewis, who were already convicted, but they were part of gangs. So maybe she's afraid of other people we aren't aware of. So I guess a potential theory is it might be designed to protect her from harm, or maybe it's her family, because there's also some thought about she's trying to do something to protect her children. So just something to throw out there.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, John, just the mere fact, and again, this is speculation right now because we don't know for sure. And again, Fancy was reporting this today. The mere fact that it could be sealed, does that implication that it carries some weight because there'd be no reason to seal it if it didn't?
I mean, I think that's an inference you can draw. And as Professor Hamilton said, and as I articulated a few moments ago, there's a myriad of reasons why they could have gone the route of sealing the proffer if, in fact, they do decide to go with that. But, I am cautiously optimistic that Ms. Magbanua is going to have some information that's helpful to the state. And again, I'm going to separate out whatever potential deal she can get from whatever information she can offer, because I'm still very skeptical that she's going to get any sort of favorable deal after putting the state through 2 trials and all that taxpayer money and being as instrumental as she was in procuring this murder. But I'm cautiously optimistic, but I think we also have to prepare for the potential that her proffer's not going to have anything that's particularly earth-shattering. They have the goods already on Charlie. I'm not going to call it a slam dunk prosecution because one can never use that terminology in a criminal trial, especially one in a case that has good defense lawyers, and Charlie certainly does. But they've got a very compelling case against Charlie. If they were to put Magbanua on the witness stand and she's going to go deny everything she said previously under oath in the 2 trials already, the defense may welcome that. They may welcome her on the stand. The other Adelsons may not be particularly happy with the latest development about her proffer. But if you're Charlie, right, and the case against you is very, very strong from the state standpoint, and then they go put Magbanua on without quote unquote receipts, and it's just her testimony, they're going to have a field day with her. They're going to confuse the jury or try to confuse the jury. They may not look at this, they being Rashbaum and Charlie's defense team, they may not look at Katie's testifying as a bad thing. They may look at it as an opportunity to muddy the waters and maybe to create a situation where they can get a juror to not convict.
Do you agree with that, Dr. Hamilton? Does putting her on the stand potentially create reasonable doubt?
It could. But we don't know what she's about to say, or maybe already has said. I agree with him that it's never a slam dunk on anything, no matter how good or tight a case you think you can have, because when you go into the courtroom with a live jury, almost anything can happen. But I have other thoughts on, yes, is it a problem if she did take the stand in terms of if she contradicted things she had said before under oath? But I think a really good prosecutor could convince the jury of, when you have people like this, meaning that in a murder for hire case, they have a bad background, they're likely to lie. And that actually, though, may make her more credible now because she's coming forward with the truth. And it's just the prosecutor can explain to the jury an understanding of why she would lie to protect herself, but now be coming forward, particularly if there is a reason for her to come forward now. Because these are not in murder for hire cases, the people who know something are most likely not the best law-abiding people in the past.
Let me just pause at this.
Go ahead,
Oh,
John.
sorry. Go ahead. I was just going to pause at this because I've thought a lot about the proffer and about Katie and the damage she can do to the four Adelsons. But just sticking with Charlie for a second, they have a very strong case against him, a very clean case. The wiretaps are extraordinarily damaging. The Dolce Vita recording is fatal to him. I mean, he says on there, he implicates himself in a myriad of different ways on the Dolce Vita recording. They've got a very clean case against him. Let's assume hypothetically the state brings Magbanua to testify and that she gets up there without corroborating documentation, but just testimony that, yes, Charlie hired me to then, of course, go hire Sigfredo and Garcia. The defense will have her on the stand for several days. They will pick apart all of her prior testimony, her two different trial testimonies that she gave, and they're going to create, I'm not saying they're going to create reasonable doubt, but they're going to turn a very clean case into much more of a slog and a morass and try to focus the jury more upon Magbanua being a liar than what exists right now, which is a very clean case against him. So I'm not sure that Rashbaum and the legal team would look at Katie testifying, if she doesn't have any tapes or any receipts, as a bad thing. It's a very bad thing for the rest of the Adelsons who haven't been indicted yet, to the extent that she has information on them. But for Charlie, I'm not so sure that his defense team is viewing this as a bad thing.
And Carm, I wanted to ask you, as the therapist, the licensed therapist of the group, Dr. Hamilton raised sort of an interesting point, if I understood it correctly, and basically, in so many words, says that the jury might have a little more room, in essence, for Katie's previous dishonesty because she's a convicted killer now. Do you feel that way, that because of what she's done, what she's been accused and convicted of, that a jury of 12 peers might be a little more forgiving if she comes forward now and tells the truth, as opposed to a quote-unquote honest person just telling the truth from the start?
No. I think that they are not going to go on that basis. I think they are going to go on the basis of an excuse that she had for behaving the way she behaved. They will go on the basis that she had to lie because she was protecting something that they don't know, but she knows. And the reason that she was lying, it was a lying in self-defense, in the sense that she wanted certain things for her children, or she didn't want to have something happen.
And Dr. Hamilton brings up a great point. Maybe she was lying to protect herself and her family. Maybe there's someone else, other bad actors out there, besides the obvious characters we don't even know about, who she feared, and that's why she was lying. So again, we don't know what we don't know, and we don't know a lot about this. One thing we do know is Daniel Rashbaum broke his ankle. I actually looked this up, John Singer, you'd be proud of me, and there was a patent for crutches in 1917, but apparently they don't work well for him, so he had to push back. There was supposed to be a case hearing Friday, this Friday, December 2nd, which is now, I believe, it has been pushed back to December 16th. I had Mark Garagos on. His episode will be out later this week. He says he always gives defense lawyers and prosecutors the benefit of the doubt. Do you? Or is there something at play here? Is it a delay tactic, possibly?
No, I mean, I think I would give him the benefit of the doubt. I think he's a reputable attorney, and he's either got a broken ankle or he doesn't, right? So it's easy to prove or disprove that. So that would be a sort of a fanciful lie, if you will. But I mean, we have these continuances occur all the time in our cases, and if defense counsel tells me that he or she's got a medical situation and they need continuance, then we're certainly amenable to granting it, because at the end of the day, it's going to go both ways. There's bilaterality in all these cases. Everybody at some point or another is going to need some favor from opposing counsel, because we all have lives outside of our cases. So I don't think he's gaining anything from a delay. It's not as if the trial is scheduled for Friday and they need more time to prepare. It's a case management hearing to update the judge on the status of discovery, to examine whether or not the Q1 dates of 23 are still a go and are still realistic. And I think that Rashbaum has already signaled that those are not, by the last management conference, where he talked about the overwhelming volume of discovery that he had to review and the logistical impediments that the jail was creating for him. So I think there was a legitimate reason, and I don't think there was nothing to gain from it either, really.
And Doctor, oh, go ahead, Carm.
No, ask the doctor first.
Dr. Hamilton, do you make anything of the fact that they're asking for delay based on a broken ankle?
Well, I'm also going to give him the benefit of a doubt as a officer of the court. I also have broken an ankle and had surgery, but I was back in the classroom within 10 days. But there could be other health issues we don't know about, or he's just giving himself a little bit more time to be healthy. So, it's probably true.
My question was, I assume that this attorney is not working solo. I assume that he has other attorneys working with him. This is basically a technicality to explain that they couldn't get into the jail to get It's not something that he has to personally work on.
I think that's sensitive. It's a sensitive area, and it depends really on the nature of the relationship with the client. It's a high-profile case. It's a murder case. They're going to be discussing when the trial is taking place, and I don't think it would be delegated to an associate to make the argument that the discovery has been reviewed, maybe 50% of it, and it's going to take this amount of time more. I don't think that's something, especially it is ministerial and to one extent. But if you're talking about setting a trial date and you get a judge who's aggressive and wants to go forward, you're going to need to push back if you really aren't able to review the documents in that period of time. So that's something that I think you would need the lead attorney on the case to argue for. It's because there could be some pushback from the judge if he wants to really get rid of this thing in Q1, and that's not feasible for the defense.
Mr. Singer, so there's a bit of an elephant in the room. We got, after a few of your appearances, got a flurry of comments. I'll read one of them, and I will let you respond. It says,
unless you want to take an attorney.
Unless you want to call your partner, Mr. Deutsch.
No, an attorney to protect his interests.
It says, in my opinion, Singer totally misspoke before and repeatedly on Katie ever doing a proffer, so it might be a little awkward for him. John, your response. You're a very intelligent man. I back you 1,000%. You made a couple comments about a proffer not happening. You still are suggesting nothing might come of it. But how would you like to respond to the Surviving the Survivor audience, of which I get plenty of flack too, as you know?
I think you have a very rabid audience. And I think before I answer the question, I will say this, that it's funny because when I've gone on TV before, I'm usually taking a very unpopular opinion because I'm arguing in favor of Wall Street bonuses because I represent Wall Street traders and bankers, and most people think they shouldn't get bonuses, and I never get vitriolic comments. And here we're all on the same team. We all want every Adelson to be indicted and behind bars. during our lives, right? We're all on the same team. None of us have a differing goal here at the end of the day. But there's a difference between a proffer and a deal, right? Katie Magbanua can get in there and she can make a proffer, and the government at that point can say, look, you've offered us nothing against Charlie that's tangible. We already know that Charlie's involved. We already have the wiretaps. We've got Dolce Vita. We don't need you for that. Thank you very much for coming and for trying to clear your conscience, but you're getting no deal. So I'm still of the belief that after 2 trials and lots of taxpayer money, that she's not going to get a better deal. They've got Charlie already, unless she has, a cell phone text. And again, this is 8 years ago. They've already scrubbed her phone. They've scrubbed Wendy's phone. Maybe they don't have the WhatsApps, and maybe she printed them and gave them to her brother. But if she's short of having a text message or a WhatsApp from Wendy, incriminating herself, I don't see what deal she's going to get. Now, I will say this, in New York, where I practice, there is no deal to be made post-sentencing. Once you've been sentenced, once you've been convicted and you've been sentenced, you can squeal, you can proffer, you can do whatever you want. There is no reduction in sentence. And that's the case for the majority of the jurisdictions. Florida, and I've examined this, does have some leeway. It's unusual. It would be highly aberrational for somebody after 2 trials to get a deal. The reason why I don't think she's getting one, and the reason why I've said that from the very beginning, is if you didn't have Dolce Vita, or you didn't have the tape recordings, and you didn't have the Adelson Institute checks, and you didn't have the motive, you couldn't get Charlie. You got all that. You don't need her for that. They're going to make a deal with her just to help push Charlie's case over the edge. After what she did, no murder would have occurred here but for her involvement. Charlie Adelson had no connection to the killers. She was the middle person. No, she didn't pull the trigger. No, it wasn't her motive. But boy, oh boy, this murder is not happening without her. And having put the state and Georgia Kaplanman through 2 trials and all that taxpayer money, they're going to give her a deal. I don't see it. So just because she's making a proffer, does that mean she's going to get a deal? I still don't think so. And I know that's not a popular opinion, and other people have differing perspectives. That's mine.
Harm.
You are referring in your argument to Charlie as if this proffer would be about Charlie. This proffer could be about the other Adelsons.
It could be, but I'm skeptical that 8 years later she's got WhatsApp sitting around. She could say whatever she wants at this point to save her skin. She's looking at life behind prison. She's in her 30s. She's got 2 small kids. Small kids, no kids, 30s, 40s, doesn't matter. It's a life behind bars. She's going to say anything, and she's going to say, sure, Wendy was involved. But what if there's nothing to back it up? What if there's not a WhatsApp, or there's not something else that can incriminate Wendy? The state has a really hard time. Could they rehabilitate her? And could they say she was self-interested and she lied? Sure. But what credibility does she have at this point? So unless she's got something more than just her word, which means nothing at this point, I'm very skeptical that they are going to cut a deal with her just on her say-so that Wendy was involved. That's where I come out on it.
Dr. Hamilton, do you agree with that? John, I love it. He's still taking a firm stance here, as a good lawyer would.
He has character.
He has character, belief, and all the rest. But Dr. Hamilton, do you agree with what John is saying, that we still might be a long ways off here? And also, since you've got the PhD, John mentioned some wiggle room in the law. Do you happen to know how much potentially her life sentence could be reduced by a judge, if at all?
Well, I agree, but for a different reason. Although I think his reason is good, but I think a better reason is, all right, not better per se, but just an additional one, is it would be very bad precedent for the prosecutors to make this kind of deal, because that incentivizes other people then to go to trial and just try to get exonerated, and then think that based on this precedent, if they don't win, is then they can have sat on the evidence that they did have, and instead later then say, okay, I'll give it to you now. That would just that would mean more cases go to trial. And so the bad precedent is not only that, but generally the criminal justice system, at least in the US, can't operate unless it has a really high guilty plea rate. And so this kind of a deal, particularly with a high profile case, this would not be a plea bargain or an outcome that wouldn't be known, partly because of your podcast making this case continue to exist in the public realm, I think for really good reasons. But it would mean that basically everyone would know, all defendants in the future would know if that were to be the case. And again, it would incentivize them to take a chance at trial, and the system just cannot accept that. The system would break down if there were even a significant number of more cases go to trial, particularly high profile ones, because as you saw in the previous trials here, is they take a long time. That's a lot of resources in the justice system.
And just a point about her life sentence being reduced. Do you know anything about, I mean, I know it's very technical and it's obviously related to Florida law, but do you happen to know what kind of, John mentioned wiggle room, what kind of wiggle room the court has in, in her sentencing?
Well, they would have to convince a judge, because she has been found guilty and sentenced. So the prosecutor can't simply say, we're going to drop the case and reduce charges or ask for a resentencing. They've got to convince a judge to basically drop the charges, although that's not the legal term for it. So in other words, it's not just the prosecutor's choice here.
So I am not a lawyer. I just play one on a podcast, which I don't even do. But so I ask a lot of dumb questions, and I'm about to ask one right now. We talked about this proffer potentially being sealed, and John, you're talking a lot about, we don't know if this is going to have the proffer is going to have merit or not have merit. If it is in fact sealed, how do we learn about the merit of the testimony that she is providing? Will we become made aware of it?
I think you're going to learn about it if all of a sudden the grand jury get convened and, Wendy or Harvey are indicted. I think if they have enough on Donna already, I just think they're not moving on her until they finish with Charlie. That's been their methodical plan throughout. They clearly have enough right now to indict and convict Donna. They may not feel they have enough on Wendy and Harvey, but that doesn't, if you all of a sudden saw a grand jury get convened and you saw Wendy and Harvey getting arrested, you would know that the proffer was successful and it actually had some teeth to it. Again, to go back to what I said before, will that translate into a deal for someone who necessitated the state to expend so many resources to go through 2 trials? And as Professor Hamilton makes a great point, several great points, but the last one about the judge having to sign off on it. Let's assume you're Judge Wheeler, right? And you presided over that trial. You saw the horrific crime scene photos, the horrific nature of the crime. You heard Katie Magbanua get up there on the stand and lie through her teeth repeatedly. Are you going to be amenable to giving a deal? He may feel right now, the judge, that there's enough to indict all 4 Adelsons, right? So why give her a deal when she's not helping that much, perhaps? They needed Luis Rivera, keep in mind. Without Luis Rivera at the beginning, none of these chain of events that have occurred thereafter would have been set in motion. At this point, I think everybody, or I would assume most everybody, feels that a conviction against Charlie is a very good possibility. They've got enough on Donna. Again, I don't know what she's going to offer vis-a-vis Wendy and Harvey. And I can't imagine she's got receipts from that long ago. But again, if you're the judge, how amenable are you going to be to letting her go free after 15, 20, 30 years? I don't know.
John, we have what's called a hook shot. It's the little soundbite at the beginning of our podcast that's supposed to do exactly that, hook you in. And I think you just gave it to us. Are you saying emphatically that they have enough goods to get Donna right now? Is it your belief that they will indict her and there's enough, a preponderance of evidence at this very moment against her?
Absolutely. I think there was a preponderance of evidence against her in May of 2016 when they arrested Garcia. There was enough in October of 16 when they arrested Katie Magbanua. The wiretaps, her saying it involves the two of us, her actions or lack of actions vis-a-vis going to the police, her signing the checks, some in sequential order to Katie Magbanua right after the murder up and until the bump. I mean, they've got more than enough to indict Donna.
Is this like my rich fantasy life? Couldn't the Markels, excuse me, couldn't the Markels sue literally the state of Florida for not indicting them for so long when they had enough cause to indict them?
No,
Dr.
because
Hamilton. Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Dr.
go ahead.
Hamilton,
I'm
take
sorry.
a shot at that.
No, so there's no liability on the part of prosecutors of not bringing a case. It's in the, it's within their power to make cases or not. So one of the popular myths is that individuals have a right to prosecute. For example, you commonly see in television shows and police procedurals where they ask the victim, do you want to prosecute or not? Well, that's just out of courtesy. People don't, the citizens don't have a right to prosecution, even if they're the victim of the case. It's totally at the sole discretion of the state as to prosecute criminal offenses. Now, and there's also, I don't see any civil liability either, because prosecutors have great powers.
Carm, it's akin, I don't want to get political, it's akin to big pharma. You can't sue if you had a bad reaction to the vaccine. They have their own discretion. John, please add to that.
I was just going to add, it's interesting in different states, again, treat this differently, but in Florida, as I've learned from listening to Ruth Markel on your podcast, in Florida, there is some mandated, if you will, communication between the state and the victim, right? They were assigned the Markels a victim advocate, first from the Tallahassee Police Department and then from the state's attorney's office. And there's some requirement of the state to confer and to keep abreast the victims of what's happening throughout the criminal processes. That's not the case in other states. That doesn't mean, though, that they need, in this case, the sign off of the Markels to make a deal with Magbanua. But you would think the state's attorney's office would take the temperature of the Markels and see what their reaction would be if they intended to make a deal. And it would be interesting to see what the Markels' reaction to that would be. You could see it going both ways. On the one hand, you could see the Markels being incredibly angry, like we all are, at Katie Magbanua for doing what she did and for helping to secure this murder. On the other hand, if she does have tangible evidence about Wendy, which I'm very skeptical that she does, it's 8 years down the road, but if she were to, and it led to a conviction of others, and it saved some time for the Markels and it expedited justice in getting all the Adelsons brought within the ambit of the law, then maybe she feel differently. But again, it would all have to be signed off on by the judge, and there's all kinds of other things involved. So
it's not a requirement of the state, but it would be a courtesy, obviously, for them to run by the proffer, run it by the Markel family, correct? Is that what you're saying?
I think it's actually obligatory to keep the victims apprised of all the processes going on in the criminal system. That does not mean that the victims have final say, because the state's attorney, Georgia Kappelman, has a client. The client is the state of Florida. It's not the victim's family. It's the state. That's her client. So she has to do what she believes is in the best interest of the state. But there is this requirement in Florida and in other states to keep and it's a great law that was passed, that victims have the right to be kept informed as opposed to being in the dark, because it's their loss, right? Ultimately, the state attorney's prosecuting for the state, but it's the family's loss. So it's a good thing that it's obligatory that they have to be kept abreast.
And it also illustrates the emotional vicissitudes, Dad taught me that word, that, the families go through here, that it's just an emotional roller coaster. But a question to both of you, Dr. Hamilton first and then John. This comes from we've got an audience that really is intelligent and pays a lot of attention. The question is as follows: if Katie's proffer has merit, how much time should Prosecutor Kaplan wait to bring in some of the other offenders before Charlie's trial or after?
Well, that one's hard to answer, having no, clue as to what her proffer is going to be, and if it involves additional people that we've never heard of. So impossible to answer. If I want to add on to the previous conversation in terms of the obligation to keep victims informed, that was one of the issues in the Jeffrey Epstein case, where prosecutors there had made a deal with them and had apparently not communicated with the victim. So just to kind of bring to light that it has been a high profile issue before.
Great point.
John,
Great point.
you care to comment on that first question about if the proffer does have merit, how much time should Prosecutor Kaplan wait to bring in some of the other offenders? Does it happen right away?
I mean, if you look back, the precedent of this case, they did indict at around the same time Garcia and Magbanua, we'll call them the low-hanging fruit, as they've been referred to in the past on different podcasts, including this one. They were indicted, one in May, one in October. Ultimately, they were tried together, although the defense tried to get them separated. Obviously, the DeCoste team had a interest in trying to divest Katie from Garcia. It didn't work because Judge Hankinson ruled they had to be tried together in 19. But I think in this type of situation, you'd want to try Charlie first, and then I think you'd want to try the others. That doesn't mean, though, that you can't indict a Wendy, a Harvey, or a Donna pending Charlie's case. You just wouldn't try them together. So if Magbanua has credible evidence, tangible evidence, not just her say-so, but real evidence, there's no reason for the prosecution to wait to indict. You just wouldn't want to try them together. You'd want to try them separately.
Carm, did you have a question?
Being a grandmother, I still wish there were a venue or a way for Ruth Markel to sue whoever she can sue for the right to be with her grandchildren. And there is
Carm, you're so litigious today. It's unlike
today
you.
I want to fight the world.
Well, they passed the Markel Act, which is going to give grandparents rights. Carm, you're coming with that perspective, and
no, but that's different. The Markel Act. I want them to have the right to see the children, and they still don't have the right to see the children.
But are you saying you'd like to see them be able to sue the Adelson family for that right?
Yes.
Dr. John, go ahead.
Sorry, I feel like I'm very zealous today about speaking. So, Dr. Hamilton, you can.
No, John, you go and then Dr. Hamilton.
Okay.
Usually it's ladies first, but you had a thought, so continue.
And like Carm, I may forget it if I don't get it out right away.
But now listen, there is a discovery here. 1 second. Don't forget what you want to say. I made a diagnosis. It's not really only a senior moment.
No, definitely not.
Wait a second. The minute I want to say something and I have a really good thought in my head, he cuts into it, even outside, even in the car, even in the house.
Carm, this isn't a therapy session. We're talking here about life and death.
So we are not going to do the same thing to you.
Now I forgot what we were talking about. John, go ahead.
Whatever the machinations are in the Waldman home, I don't want to be privy to them. What I will say,
I'm not a therapist.
and now I literally forgot. No. So the way the Markel Act works, the way I understand it, is if there's a conviction of the surviving parent, or there is a finding in a civil suit of a finding of wrongful death, then of course the Markel Act kicks in and the grandparents have full visitation rights, so on and so forth. So why haven't they sued? Why have the Markels not yet sued the Adelson family for wrongful death? I think it's pretty clear to me that they're trying their best to still work with Wendy. And as recalcitrant as Wendy has been, and as recalcitrant as she continues to be, they still have to navigate through Wendy, or they're not going to have access. What they could do is they could bring a civil suit, then they'd never have access until there was an adjudication sometime down the road. That could be years down the road of wrongful death being imputed to the Adelson family. Then the act would kick in. But while that was pending, that civil suit, that would be it for the Markels. They'd never see the grandchildren. So I think, and why does Ruth Markel, when she comes on this podcast or when she speaks in other form, why is she not disparaging Wendy? Why is she not killing, if you will, the Adelsons with horrendous comments, et cetera? Because she can't. She has to work through them still. It must be a super hard thing for her to bite her tongue and to hold back everything she's feeling and wants to say. But right now, she's got to do that. Wendy is the vessel right now. So I think that's the reason there's been.
Norm, you could not bite your tongue.
I could not do that.
You could not do that. It's interesting. So I picked a quote. Ruth just spoke to Fox News Digital, not the channel, but digital. And I believe this is from her book, actually. But she writes, "I am 77 years old and will likely die before reaching the small satisfaction of any kind of meaningful justice." I mean, keep in mind, Ruth, again, is the victim, as are her grandchildren. When you hear that quote, Dr. Hamilton, what kind of emotions does it elicit? And do you think she'll get justice?
Sadness for her.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just the idea of justice means something different for everyone. And it must be very complicated for them what justice is to them, because from the perspective of the grandchildren is, even though there's a belief that many have that, all the Markels were involved, there's no real evidence, at least that I've heard of, is that there's no evidence that they mistreat those children. In fact, there's evidence that they love those children. And so that must be complicated then, in terms of, it appears that the Adelsons are trying to, or not to, interfere with a loving relationship and the people that the grandsons have been living with and around all this time. So they're probably also thinking about what's good for their children, not to infect the relationship they're having with basically their mother and their caregivers. So that's a difficult justice. Justice for them is not the same as justice for the boys.
And John, I was smart enough to understand your point about, not wanting to, file a civil lawsuit, wrongful death lawsuit. But just for one moment, assume that the Markel family could do that right now. What could a victory in a case like that, what could it result in?
So the one thing I'm not sure of on the Markel Act is, when does it kick in? In other words, I know it kicks in when there's a conviction of the surviving parent, or when there's a finding of wrongful death in a civil suit. I know it kicks in then, but would it apply to in other words, would the act apply going forward? The act was passed in 2022. The murder took place in 2014. Let's assume there were a wrongful death lawsuit and there was an adjudication in 2024. Would the act apply to the Markels, given that the finding was after the passage of the act, but the murder was antecedent to it? I just don't know enough about the bill. But one thing that Professor Hamilton said that also got me thinking, and when I said earlier about how this is a rare situation where everybody, meaning all of your listeners, everyone who comes on, I think we're all in alignment that we want the Adelsons behind bars, all of us. But I also think that the reason why we all were so gripped by this case and why we're all so obsessed with it is, at least in my case, after listening to the podcast and hearing about the grandparent alienation and hearing about the Adelsons living their life and not having been charged, at least at that point they hadn't been in 2019, it's a sadness and an anger. It's just, how can we live with this? How can these people be walking around free? How can poor Ruth Markel and Phil Markel and Shelley Markel be denied access to their grandchildren and their nephew? How can this family have been totally excised from these poor boys' lives? It's such a harrowing, sad tale. and it engenders such palpable anger that I think we all feel that's why we're so riveted by this case. And we just want justice. I think everybody listening, everybody speaking, we all want justice for this family.
I would like to add one more thing. The length of time that it takes. The length of time where little children grow up to be adults almost.
Carm, by the way, while everyone fawns over you, and I'm not jealous at all in the comments, there have been a very few number of commenters who address the pitch of your voice that jolts them, and I felt
they
much
said
better.
It's like a nail going on a chalkboard.
And it made me feel better because that has been raising my blood pressure for 53 years. Another question from a viewer, and again, Dr. Hamilton, this is a big hypothetical, but as long as we're having pundits on, I figure why not? So here's the question. If Katie delivers the goods, meaning the proffer is very strong, however you want to define that, do you believe Wendy is an accomplice just by not bringing forward the others if she knew about the crime and the evidence?
Well, it would have to be a bit more than knowledge. So it'd have to be some kind of affirmative act to assist, either before, during, or after. And again, we don't know exactly what Katie's going to say. But I did have another thought about that in terms of the timing. So one of the questions was, if she proffers something that is beneficial to the prosecution, how quickly should they act on it? Another thought I had, though, on that there would be a delay is, if she is coming up with evidence she hasn't before, and particularly if it conflicts with her testimony, we have a perjury problem. And not only a potential new charge of perjury, but then prosecutors are going to have to go further to try to assure as much as they can that they're not going to put a witness like her on the stand who may perjure herself again. And so they would have to try to make great efforts to ensure that what she will testify to, if that happens, is going to be the truth this time. And because, if she does give information that conflicts and therefore is perjurious, that's an additional duty that prosecutors have in the normal case, because they can never put on somebody that they think is going to perjure themselves, but meaning that the burden is higher now with a known perjurer. So that could delay things because of the prosecutor's duty.
John, your reaction to that, and also about the question that if Katie's proffer is good, is Wendy by default an accomplice by not coming forward?
Yeah, I mean, in Florida and in most states, mere knowledge of a crime is not enough to convict someone or indict them. You have to engage in an affirmative or overt act to be part of the conspiracy. And I think on Wendy's behalf, that's not going to be difficult. I mean, she clearly supplied the people involved in this conspiracy information about Dan's schedule, the fact that he was leaving the next day on the 19th. It had to be done on the 18th. There were other overt acts they can point to, to get her as part of the conspiracy. So I'm not concerned about that. As far as Katie being a perjurer and delays in that regard, two things. One, Katie is a perjurer. She's lied 2 times under oath. They have a tremendous problem with her. It's not like Rivera. Rivera was a gang member, sure. Rivera was a bad guy. Rivera was this, Rivera was that. He drove the car that ultimately led to the murder, but he hadn't lied under oath. The first trial, when they put him on the witness stand, he hadn't lied. They pointed to inconsistencies in the second trial from his first testimony and also from his proffer and from his other deposition statements, but he hadn't lied at that point. Putting Katie on the stand after lying in 2 trials, super difficult. Delays, sure, but that doesn't mean they couldn't indict right away and just not schedule a trial date for some time down the road. And Wendy's lawyers, if she gets indicted, or Donna, they're going to have the same problems that Rashbaum had. It's the same 57,000 documents. It's the same difficulty with being in prison. It's the same logistical impediments. So you're not going to get a very quick trial anyway.
Dr. Hamilton, So we had Mark Garagos on, who's obviously a famed criminal defense attorney, represented Michael Jackson. The list goes a mile long. But one of the defendants he represented was Scott Peterson, who was convicted for killing his pregnant wife, Lacey. He's serving a life sentence. He had the death penalty, which was taken off the table because California, I think, took it off the table. My point is this. Mark Garagos proclaimed Scott's innocence, I believe, as you know, while the trial was going on, very vocally. Tara Kawas, same thing. She said Katie Magbanua was innocent. Now it appears that Katie's coming forward with information that will potentially show that she's not so innocent. We all believe that she probably is not innocent in any way, shape, or form. So what kind of predicament, if any, does that put a defense attorney in, having proclaimed innocence, and then your client turns around and says, I have something to offer?
No liability whatsoever. They're kind of expected to do such a thing. They're supposed to zealously advocate for their clients. So they're doing their job. In fact, if they did the opposite, if they believed that their clients were guilty and they came out and said they were guilty, then that would be a problem. So it was only a problem in one direction.
Interesting. So Fancy Fiction, who's been all over this, shout out to the OG, the original gangster, of course, his mentor lawyer, who's been on this, I think, from day one. But Fancy Fiction came on not far after him. And she has a video out called Knives Out, obviously a little parody of the movie Knives Out. And it's about Luis Rivera confessing and during his proffer and saying that Sigfredo Garcia, who obviously is convicted, told him, meaning Sigfredo tells Luis Rivera, quote unquote, that lady, that's Wendy. It's for those who are interested, it's at 3:10 in this video on Fancy Fiction's YouTube channel. The question is, how would Sigfredo know Wendy's name and call her the lady? Does that, John, implicate Wendy in any way? What is your legal analysis of that?
Well, I think it would be helpful in any future prosecution of Wendy. I've always maintained that first and foremost, this murder was done for Donna, and secondarily for Wendy, because who's been raising the kids? Donna, right? We've heard the wiretaps where Donna's always talking to Charlie and the kids are in the background, and Wendy's off gallivanting with Dave, her boyfriend at the time, or she's working and there was no caretaker. So it was all for Donna. But yeah, I mean, I think that's helpful. But just by virtue of the fact that Charlie may have disclosed to Katie, who then disclosed to Sigfredo, who disclosed to Rivera, that we're doing the murder so that that she gets her kids back, the lady gets her kids back, that's not enough to convict Wendy. There's other things, I think, that are even stronger in favor of indicting and convicting Wendy than Luis Rivera's line about ultimately Wendy wanting her kids back. But it's another piece of the puzzle. It's how these prosecutions go. There's lots of little things that add up to one big thing, and that's, I think, the case with all the defendants here. It was the case with Katie. There were lots of things. There was the checks. There was the motive. There were the wiretaps. Same as Charlie. There's going to be lots of things that are going to add up, and in the aggregate are going to eventually, hopefully, result in a conviction.
And John, Garagos is not the only one who defends high-profile clients. You do that as well. I'm not going to drop names here. You can feel free to. Okay. But let me ask you a question. How does being high-profile complicate the case for both the defense and the prosecution? I mean, this case has been on Dateline 2020, 10 million downloads on Wondery. So how does it make it more difficult for the defense and the prosecution?
I think that when it's a high profile case, and we've seen this a lot, that there's going to be media interest. I mean, in our practice, when someone high profile gets fired from their job, there's lots of reporters wanting to know why, and they're snooping around, and it creates an extra layer of difficulty in the sense that you have to engage crisis management specialists, PR experts who can help navigate the dual track of what's happening. One track is the media, one track is the courtroom. In my cases, people who get fired have reputational risk. their kids can read, and their spouses, and they can read, and future employers can read about all the malfeasance the firms have, accused them of engaging in. Hence, you need a reputation person or a crisis person to try to get stories out there that are going to be favorable, because at the end of the day, it's all going to be Googleable, if you will. So, you want the media to run your side of the story. There's all sorts of extra layers of difficulty when PR people are involved. The other thing is that when someone's very high profile, and we've had many of those, there's a lot of concentric circles around the person. You're not just dealing with the client. Sometimes you're dealing with the client's business manager. Sometimes you're dealing with their talent agent. So the phone calls that would often take place between attorney and client, that the group can enlarge in somewhat when it's a high profile person and they've got means and resources and people fawning all over them, that results in what I call these concentric circles.
Carm, what I would have done to know John Singer in 2017 when I left Fox News, I was a big fish in a very large sea, but maybe it's not
you
too
were
late.
A small fish in a big
Small
sea.
fish in a big sea is what I meant to
It
say.
was
But
a
I
Freudian
will.
thing. He wished.
I am going to talk to John off air. Maybe there's still hope, because I have some stories to tell, John. Some real stories to tell.
That was
That
was a golden age of trials.
They tried to duct tape me with an NDA, John, which I know you can get me out of. I'll talk to you off air.
But
Anyway.
they gave you money when you quit.
Peanuts from what Singer would get. It's not about me, Carm. You know that. Dr. Hamilton, if you were Charlie Adelson's attorney, is there any chance you would try to avoid trial and make a plea deal?
Sure. I think if you believe that there's a significant chance that you're going to lose that trial, you might as well see what you can get for your client. That would be responsible for your client, knowing that, with a murder conviction, it's life without parole. So, that not much lose to at least talk about it and see what you can get, and then check in with your client whether they're willing to potentially get a sentence that they might be able to be released before they're dead.
If you guys will indulge, I know your time is valuable, but I always like to get some viewer questions and comments in here. So first one comes from, the name is User, and about 700 letters after that, so I'll spare you. In my opinion, she, meaning Katie, kept quiet because her and her attorney believed she would be found not guilty. She 100% knows the story, and she knows all who is involved, obviously. I read these verbatim. Who cares if she lied? If she comes forward and can incriminate the whole family, which she could, her words are gold. They're not going to give a crap if she lied. Without her, they probably would never incriminate Donna and Wendy. John, your reaction?
I think I agree with some of that, and other parts I don't agree with. I don't think they need her to get Donna. They have enough on Donna. I think they're going to move on Donna, barring something unforeseeable occurring after they convict Charlie. That's been their methodical approach thus far, one by one, which is frustrating because, as Carm alluded to, it takes time, and time is running out for some of the older people in the case. So it's you'd hope it was more expeditious, but that's not the path they've chosen. I don't know what she again I don't know what she knows. But I don't think the prosecutor is going to ascribe any weight to what she says unless there's some granularity behind it. Receipts, recordings, something more than just her word. She's proven herself to be a recidivist liar. 2 trials. They must hate her at this point. And unless she's got something tangible, if she goes in there and says, "Hey, Georgia, guess what? Wendy's involved. Charlie told me that. And I know that that's not enough. They need more from her at this point to overcome this habitual liar persona that she's exuded to them."
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Hamilton, to John's point, what is the threshold in terms of what she needs to bring? I asked this question of Jeremy Mutz, who's a former assistant state attorney out of Tallahassee, and he basically said there's just a code among the state and defense attorneys that if you're going to bring forward a proffer, it's got to be something meaty. So is there some sort of threshold, something that she needs to bring to the table?
Yeah, something sufficient that's going to make a difference to the prosecution that they don't already have or think they can get. And I'm wondering, because Katie seems to be a very strategic person. She seems pretty bright. I don't discount the fact that she might have some kind of insurance that she was holding over them, some kind of evidence, because there was a theory where we're just pontificating a lot on this case, is that perhaps one of the reasons that she didn't flip on them was somehow her kids were being taken care of. So I wouldn't put it past her to have some kind of evidence as insurance in order to convince whoever to continue to pay, and that now potentially they're not paying, and therefore she might be able to provide that insurance. And that could be, for example, in the form of the copies of WhatsApp. She may well have kept them as that kind of insurance.
Dr. Hamilton is a soothsayer, because this is the next comment. It kind of revolves around that. And John, I'll get your reaction to this comment. The Adelsons are most likely not keeping their end of the bargain and not financially funding her family. The Adelsons figured Katie can't do anything because she's doing life, in all caps. Katie hopefully has a bombshell with receipts, which will implicate all the Adelsons. If you think about it, Katie really holds the skeleton key and carried out Charlie's wishes and profited big time. Your thoughts?
Who's
Singer.
Okay. I would say I've never been a buyer of the theory that her kids were getting taken care of, because it's an unenforceable non-contract. It's an optical illusion, if you will. There's no way that that's why she kept quiet. I think she kept quiet because I think she wanted to have her cake and eat it too, which is she wanted to get acquitted. She believed she would get acquitted. And then if she did, she wouldn't have to make any admission and have it affect her going forward down the road. So she wouldn't be sullied, if you will, by a confession that she somehow was part of this thing. So I think she thought she's going to get off. I don't blame Tara Kawas and Krista Coast. I don't think that they misled or deluded her into believing she'd get acquitted. I think Professor Hamilton's right. She's a very smart, strategic person. I think she's the smartest one of the whole group. The whole group included being Charlie, her, Rivera, and Garcia. I think Wendy's probably smarter than all of them, but I think she's smarter than Charlie. And I think she believed that as a mother of two kids, that she was going to get off, that there were some really bad players involved here. Charlie, Sigfredo, Luis. She wouldn't be painted with that brush, she thought. I think she thought it was going to be hung jury, and she'd get another hung jury or an acquittal. I don't think there was ever a payoff down the road. I know that's been bandied about out there. I just never have been a buyer of that.
Carm,
Can
this
I add
next
on
one-
to that?
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Hamilton, of course.
So while I have agreed with almost everything John has said, I'm gleefully happy to finally disagree with something. Just because I respect them so much. I just think in kind of the underworld that they live in, they don't really care about legally enforceable contracts. So I think that kind of world thinks that, their type of agreement is bound by things other than the law. So that's my point of disagreement, where I'm very happy of.
By the way,
I
I heard a crazy factoid, and I believe I got this from Fancy as well. Fancy, I apologize if it's not you, but I think 99% is you, that the Markel boys, now going by Adelson, go to the same elementary school that Katie Magbanua went to. It's such a crazy small world. Carm, do you remember what you were going to say now that I interrupted you?
Yes, you interrupted
Go
me
ahead
again.
then.
When we talk about receipts, proof, what better proof than all those paychecks that were given by Dana to Katie Magbanua with dated
Those
ahead
are
of
actual
time.
receipts, you're saying.
They are actual proofs that she was paid by them.
Carm,
There
proof is
no-
like sheep. It's plural and singular. But John, what about the actual receipts, like
really
physical
proof,
receipts?
The plural is proof.
Yeah, it's like
I think-
sheep.
I think Carmen's right, and that's why I've been skeptical from the beginning.
Because
about any
they
sort of
already have
deal.
the proof.
They already
What
have
did you
it.
provide?
They already have it, and I think that's part of the frustration And that's, I think, what got everybody worked up and lathered up in the first place about this case, which is they had them from 16 forward, and they took 6 years to arrest Charlie. I know they were hoping for the slam dunk, meaning Katie flipping on him. Never happened. I think that they could have gone after Charlie and Donna then. They had the actual receipts. There was no conceivable reason for why she should have been paid $17,000 by the Adelson Institute, because she didn't do one thing for them. She admitted that under oath in the second trial. There was not one thing she could point to other than setting up an appointment for a website, which is before she was even put on the payroll. So they have the actual receipts. They've had them for 6 years.
But so then this implicates also Harvey.
Correct. I mean, I think Donna, at that point, I am not sure whether the practice had been sold to Charlie. I think at some point it had been, and he may have been the actual owner of that practice. Charlie in 14, Donna was the manager signing the checks. I think Harvey at that point, and I could be wrong, Fancy would know better than I would, but I think Harvey was an employee at that time and Charlie was the actual owner, but Donna was signing the checks. There was no reason for that to be the case other than a payoff for a murder. So they've had that for 6 years. That's the frustrating part that I think got us all into the place we're at right now with this case. Frustration, anger, sadness, frustration being, for me, perhaps the predominant feeling.
I love Singer's passion here.
No, but I think Georgia Kappelman has been stellar so far, but somebody else who is maybe different would have done it, accelerated the process.
I don't think it's her call, though. Because she's not the state attorney. She's the assistant state attorney. So we don't know what machinations were going on in that office as to why they didn't move faster, whether, why Willie Meggs didn't move faster on the Adelsons. There's a lot of speculation, and I don't profess to know the politics of Tallahassee or what was happening behind the scenes, but I know it wasn't Georgia's call to make. The ultimate arbiter of whether to move was not Georgia or the Tallahassee Police Department. It was Willie Meggs, the state's attorney, and then Jack Campbell in that role.
Carm, this one is for you. There's two quick. The first one is just a comment, a standalone comment, which says, and it's from Vivian Cherez, says, I love the son and mother's relationship. People say that he's mean to her. I don't think he is. I'm not, Carm, but this one's...
No, he's not.
This one's really for you. Carolyn, with a bunch of numbers afterwards. Let's hope if anything comes of this, it's the charging and conviction of Wendy Adelson. Seeing this self-absorbed witch brought to justice would be satisfying. Her attitude of being the untouchable golden girl who can get away with obvious lies and malicious behavior needs to be cut down to size. Her behavior, particularly as an attorney, is disgusting. Nothing more than a big F-U to Dan's family and all involved and interested in this murder. Your reaction to that comment, Carm? Let me lead you into it here, and you might get flack depending on how you answer this. Do you believe at her core, Wendy Adelson is an evil person, a witch, as this person calls her?
Well, that would be like black and white, sort of like, I think let's put it this way, she has issues.
Would you describe them as major or minor issues, Carmelo?
It looks from all that we learned about their private lives as pretty major.
Dr. Hamilton, this comes from Guy V. Boxing. I like the last name. I'm a fight fan. There is a Florida statute that allows a convicted person to have access for a lesser sentence if information given is extremely valuable to the state. That statute supersedes the original sentence. Number one, is this correct? And number two,
Joel,
how do you describe extremely valuable?
We went over this.
It's a comment, Carm.
Well, if it's comment, we have...
Dr. Hamilton, your response.
I actually don't know the Florida law that the person is referring to, so I can't say yes or no as to whether that's correct.
John, this is interesting. This came up quite a bit, so I'll just read the comment. John, Charlie paid big money for the hit. If this defense will claim that he sent them only to warn but not kill, why did he pay for the wrong job to be done? This goes back to a previous episode we had, John, when I was asking you to play the defense attorney, and you said maybe he went up there just to bully, maybe Sigfredo and Luis went up there just to bully Dan, and it all went south.
That they could use that
defense. Would you still stand by that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, as I said last time or whatever time it was when that came up, I think it's a ridiculous defense. I think it's utterly preposterous, but he doesn't have a lot of options at this point. I mean, assuming there's not a plea deal, and I don't think there will be, and Rashbaum indicated nothing of the sort at the last, at the Arthur hearing, he's got to go with something, right? And when the person who wrote that comment said he paid a lot of money, the $100,000, he's going to say, yeah, I paid some money. I paid $20,000. He's not going to concede. There's no record that he paid $100,000. That's Rivera saying, yeah, I got 35 and Katie got X and Sigfredo got the other tranche of it. But there's no proof that he paid $100,000 other than Rivera's comment. So again, do I think this is what happened, that he sent them up there to scare Dan Markel? No, I don't. But let's say he says that. Let's say he gets on the stand and says, yeah, this is why we didn't go to the police. This is why the wiretaps, we say what we say. It's because, sure, I did pay these guys to go up there, but ultimately they acted rogue. Could he go with it? Yeah. Is it going to be a successful defense? No. I'm just trying to brainstorm as to what Rashbaum could possibly go with. It can't be he's innocent. I'm innocent of everything. It can't be the wiretaps, Dolce Vita, the checks from the Adelson Institute, Rivera, everything points towards him. So he's got to go with something.
So now he's praying for Katie to testify so that he can kind of hook into that and confuse the jury, as you said.
No, I think that what I said originally was, let's assume that Katie has no quote unquote receipts other than what we've seen so far. No WhatsApps, nothing 8.5 years later to evidence Charlie or the Adelson family's involvement. And let's assume they're going to put her on the witness stand just to say that, yeah, Charlie did this and Charlie did that. And here's what he said at Dolce Vita, even though, of course, we already heard what he said at Dolce Vita through the enhancement. I don't think that Rashbaum would look at that as the worst thing in the world. Without Katie right now, he's looking at an almost sure conviction. If Katie gets up there, the two-time liar under oath, and he's able to get her on the stand for a couple of days and make mincemeat of her and confuse the jury, maybe that's the lifeline. That's why I'm saying that I don't think Rashbaum, was looking at Katie as the worst thing in the world, short of her having any tangible proof that we haven't seen before. That's all I'm saying.
And a final comment for all of you to comment on. This was a long one, and I cut off her name, so I apologize. It goes as follows. I'm 1,000% optimistic and certain that Magbanua's proffer has been very productive and will put the whole family behind bars without exception. Why? Because Catherine Magbanua does not know all the potential evidence that the prosecution is reserving for the rest of the co-conspirators. So therefore, she only has one option if she wants her proffer to work towards her potential deal, which is to tell the truth and details that will corroborate what is awaiting for the rest. She knows this is her last card, her last chance to work something out. It will be interesting to see if we get confirmation that her past legal team were paid by the Adelsons, and more interesting, if it's been known to the public, if this will carry any consequence for the attorneys, goes on and on and on. But what about the fact that this commenter is saying she's 1,000% sure that this proffer is going to get the entire Adelson clan convicted? Dr. Hamilton, you first. I have an idea of what you're going to say.
Ooh, will you write it down so you can show me after you hear? So no, I can't. You can't be that sure. And the reason is because of Katie's personality. She's rolled the dice on her life twice before. She's been known to believe, she believes that she can convince people of her story, whether how close it is to reality and the truth or not. So I don't, is it very likely that she does bring something to the table? Yes, but we can't be sure that it's the truth or she has enough. Because one of the other things I've been thinking about is, why else would she want to have this meeting? Well, think if you're locked up in jail, you want to have any excuse to have something happen in your life. So maybe she has convinced them she's got something and she gets something exciting. She gets in the news again. And ends up there and doesn't really have anything. I wouldn't discount that alternative either.
John, your reaction to this final comment about 100% optimistic it will put all the Adelsons away?
I think you meant 1,000%.
1,000%. 1,000%. Correct.
I was going to say that when I was teaching them percentages, I was telling them that 100 is the highest.
If you can teach my kids math, I would appreciate it. I will make it. I'm going to make some predictions here. Okay. And when my clients ask me to make predictions, obviously I cannot. I give them every caveat in the world. Like, you never know what a jury's going to do, but I don't have any clients in this one. So here's my prediction. She's going to talk. She's going to tell them everything she knows. She's going to fabricate some things because that's what she does. And she's a liar and she's facing life. I think she'll have some additive things to offer Georgia Kappelman. I think at the end of the day, she's not going to have quote unquote receipts. I don't think she's going to have enough to get a deal for herself because, again, for all the reasons we talked about, I don't think it's going to result her proffer in a indictment in the near term of any of the Adelsons. But I also predict that after Charlie gets convicted, Donna's going to be indicted and convicted. And I do think there's more likely than not, as they said in the Tom Brady Wells report, that sham document, that it's more likely than not that Wendy Adelson is going to get indicted, not as a result of what happens from the proffer, but just down the road, the sequential prosecutions. Unfortunately, I do not think Harvey is going to get indicted because of his age and because by the time they get to him, he's the least attractive of all the Adelsons, in my opinion. He's going to be too old to prosecute. That's my prediction. I hope I'm wrong, but that's my prediction.
But I heard you correctly. You said Donna and Wendy will be indicted.
Donna, definitely. I've always said it's greater than 50% chance that Wendy gets indicted. Everybody wants Wendy to get indicted. The state must hate her guts after listening to her testify for an hour and a half in both trials. And we all hated her. Can you imagine the questioner having to listen to her and all the lies she was spewing? I do think they'll eventually get to her. But I don't think it's going to be as a result of the proffer. I don't think the Adelsons were careless enough to WhatsApp her, Wendy included, in about the conspiracy. I don't think they were. Now, again, someone could argue the contrary and say, well, they were stupid enough to put her on the payroll of the Adelson Institute. Sure. And I get that argument. I just don't think she's going to have enough in her proffer to get the Adelsons indicted, but they will be indicted for separate reasons down the road.
Dr. Hamilton, the final word for the JD PhD.
Well, I think that just put John's clients on notice that he probably makes predictions on your behalf and just doesn't inform you of them.
Those are bold predictions, John. By the way, that silence you're hearing, I instituted a law after the last podcast. Speaking of the law, Carmela is no longer allowed to bring plastic bags into the studio because she gets ants in her pants about 50 minutes in. She starts rustling. Not only does her phone go off, but last time she was shaking a bag.
Yeah, but you didn't say why.
Because you want to go visit your husband.
Yes.
And that is why she was just rattling the microphone. So without further ado, Carm, we'll let you get to the nursing home. It's hard to believe that you're going to a nursing home. Prior to my dad being in the nursing home, our first Surviving the Survivor shirt said straight out of the nursing home. And it was a picture of my mom.
You know, that was like a month ago. I said to Joel during COVID, I said, I'm so grateful that you take, I live in a condominium. And I called it the nursing home because there are a lot of other old people in Miami. So I said, I'm so grateful you take me out of the nursing home. And he made up cups that said right out
Coffee mugs. And who would
Co-
know that months later you'd actually be at a nursing home?
Yeah,
Carmen? Be careful what you say. Be careful what you say.
Yeah, I have to be.
Dr. Hamilton, sorry for putting up with our mishugas. That means craziness in Yiddish, but we're happy to have you. Again, please support us at Patreon. If you're a white-collar executive on Wall Street, please support John Singer. If you're a student, be nice to Dr. Hamilton. Carmela, thank you. Everyone, thank you. We'll be back soon enough with another episode of Surviving the Survivor. Love you.